record on this computer. I also want to make this larger. Okay, very good. Okay, I'm going to open up here. I want to talk about Talmudic sources and Midrashic sources that talk about prayer, specifically Talmudic sources. When I was there at the Synagoga Choral, so there I talked about prayer a little bit, and I'll just give a small introduction, then we'll get into it. I said already there in Synagoga Choral, the Hebrew word for prayer is tefillah. Tefillah, which is in Hebrew taf pei lamed hey. And the question is what the word means. Of course, tefillah, King David says in the Psalms, va'ani tefillah, I am prayer, which also could mean I pray that. And Moses prays to God. So tefillah is something which is, of course, biblical. And it could come from one of two sources. One is the word lifalel, which means to hope or to expect. Because in last week's Pericopa, when Jacob meets the children of Joseph at the end of the book of Genesis, so he says to him, I did not expect to see you, and God is showing me your children, Ephraim and Menashe. So the term there in Hebrew is lo filalti. I did not expect, lo filalti, lefalel. So it could be tefillah is from the word lefalel, which means to expect, to hope. Because when a person prays, they hope that God will answer their prayers in the positive. Another possibility for the word tefillah is in the book of, I think it's Vayikra, Natan beflilim. Let me just open that up for a moment and find it. Natan beflilim means investigation has to be done. So let me just find that for a moment. Yes, Natan beflilim. Exact source. Okay, it's Exodus 21:22. Natan biflilim. Exodus 21:22. And modern Hebrew too, word plili means criminal. So a criminal investigation is chakira plilit. So the word plili, which is already biblical from the book of Exodus 21, in modern Hebrew also means criminal, like a criminal investigation. So how does that relate to tefillah? Because in tefillah, not only are we hoping for God to answer us in the positive, but we also want to investigate ourselves to see whether we are deserving that God answer us in the positive. Because if we're not, then, as I mentioned that time also, there was a rabbi in Jerusalem, his name was Yaakov Moshe Harlap. He was also a student of Rabbi Kook. And he said, what is the point of prayer? If we're asking God to change his mind, that's assuming that God is not all-knowing. Because if God is all-knowing, then why does he have to change his mind? So what does it mean to pray? What are we actually asking for? So Rabbi Chailap says, in prayer, we're asking for something, but we're not asking God to change his mind. We're trying to change ourselves in order to make ourselves worthy of now God giving us something. In other words, we're trying to change ourselves. So once we change ourselves, we're saying, look, God, we changed ourselves, as you can see. I think we now deserve what we didn't have before. So the change is not in God, the change is in man. This would relate both things together. We're both, for the word lefalel, we're hoping for something. And on the second, and simultaneously, we have introspection or self-inspection where we're trying to see if we are deserving. Because people always like asking for things and never really care whether they deserve or not. So it's true. when a person needs charity, you don't have to ask the question, are they deserving? If you're going to give them like 5 lei, it's not okay. I know some people that like to investigate every person. Oh, that guy, he probably has lots of money he doesn't need. It could be, but your 5 lei is not going to change the world one way or another. But it's true. If 1,000 people give him 5 lei that day, then it might change the world. There's an interesting argument, by the way, between two rabbis in Jerusalem. One of them is still around, one of them is not. Should you give charity to anybody who asks? So there's a Rabbi Aviner who lives here in Jerusalem. He used to say, well, if it's obvious to you that the person is not really somebody who needs money, then you don't have to. But there was another rabbi whose name was Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who also lived in Jerusalem. He used to say, yes, you should even give to the people who are charlatans. Don't give them a lot, but give them something, because they're the excuse when the time comes and we come to the world to come, to the day of judgment, and God will say, why didn't you give to all these people who were needy? We'll say, what do you mean? Look at all these guys who are charlatans. So we have to give them charity sometimes, so they're our excuse that we didn't give to everybody. You want to make sure that there's a few charlatans are still around.
Maybe we have to read Maimonides, the levels of charity.
Yes, there are about 10 different levels of charity, and the highest, of course, is matan beseter, which means giving charity without the person knowing.
Absolutely.
There's a famous story about that. And
I don't.
The story is about the miser of Krakow. The story of the miser of Krakow, by the way, is actually a famous story from Krakow, but it was told many times by Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, so I'll tell it the way that he used to tell it. Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach his family was from Germany, but they moved to the United States, and he was known for his music, actually, for a lot of his songs. So I'll tell you a story about that, about giving charity without anybody knowing. So the name of the story is called The Holy Miser. How do you say miser in Romanian? Miser is somebody who doesn't like giving money to anybody. How do you say?
Zgârcit.
Zgârcit. It's not easy to pronounce. Zgârcit.
Like a cheap.
With avar.
Right, they don't like giving anybody. Right.
Se poate spune și avar.
Okay. So the story goes that there was a man, I can't remember his name. Let's say, I don't know, let's call him Yosef for whatever reason, because we just started. And he was a very rich man, and he lived in the city of Krakow in Poland. But he was a big miser. And whenever the head of the Jewish community would come and say, Yosef, maybe you'll give us something. So, we have a lot of poor people in the town. We have to rebuild part of the synagogue. There are things to do. He says, no, I work very hard for my money. There's no reason for me to give it to anybody else. You need money, you work for it. And he never gave anybody anything. So that's it. The years went by. They would try every now and then. And the miser, no, nothing. So one day the miser took sick, and he was visited by the burial society, which in Hebrew is called the Chevra Kadisha. And they said to him, Yosef, you've never given money to the community your whole life. If you will give money now to charity to the community, we'll bury you. If not, after you die, we're not even going to bury you. We'll just leave you in the house. So Yosef the miser says, look, it's my money. I'm not giving it to anybody. And if you can't bury me, I don't care. They said, Joseph, you can't take the money with you. Why don't you give a donation? He said, look, I'll just bury myself. Now just leave the house. Okay, so they left. They didn't know what to do. A day goes by. Unfortunately, Yosef the miser dies. And the burial society said they weren't going to bury him, so they had to respect their word. A day goes by, and the neighbor says, this is wrong. You can't just leave a body in the house. So the neighbor, in the middle of the night, he takes the body of Yosef the miser, takes him to the Jewish cemetery, and right at the corner of the cemetery, he buries him there, and there he puts a little plaque, Yosef the miser. And that's where he buries it. Anyhow, next Friday morning, an old man comes to the rabbi of the community and knocks on the door. The rabbi says, "What would you like?" He says, "Rabbi, I have a question." He says, "What's the question?" He says, "Usually on Friday morning, I get some money from the community, and it says in honor of the Sabbath, enough money to buy a couple of meals and maybe a bottle of wine, but I didn't get it this morning. Is there a reason why?" The rabbi says, I'm not familiar with any money that we give on Friday mornings from the community. And then 5 minutes later, some woman comes over and she's sort of limping, knocks on the door, says, "Rabbi, every Friday morning I get an envelope from the community for the Sabbath, and I didn't get it this week. Is there a problem?" The rabbi says, "You get an envelope?" And then every 5 minutes, somebody else was coming, like 25 people show up at the door. They said, "How come we didn't get the envelope this week? Is there a problem?" Rabbi says, "Let me try to figure this out." Says, "Tell me your story." Well, the old man says, "My story is, I lost my business and I was having a very hard time. And so I started asking friends, family, if they could help me, but unfortunately it was a difficult time. I figured, you know what, I'll give it a chance. I'll go to Joseph the miser. You never know, maybe he'll have a bit of a heart." So I knocked on the door. He opened up. He said, "Would you like a cup of tea?" I said, "Okay." Had a cup of tea. He brought me some biscuits. He said, "What's the problem, my friend?" I told him my problem. He says, "Uh-huh. And theoretically, how much would you need?" He says, "You know what? Even if I had, 5 zlotys a week, I would do the job." So he wrote it down in a little book, closed the book, looked at me, and then like a madman, he started jumping up and down. He said, "What? You want my money that I work hard for? Get out of my house." And this guy who was so sweet 5 minutes before, he was acting like a madman. And so I ran out. And then the lady with the limp tells the same story, but she went to Joseph and he was nice to her, and then he sent her out of the house. And it turns out that all these people, right? And they all said that Friday morning, before the Sabbath, they got an envelope and it said Krakow community, and it was the exact sum that they had asked for. So they were very happy that the community stepped in and gave them the money. The rabbi said, "That wasn't the community. That was Joseph the miser. He must have done it all the time. And we judged him wrong. It turns out that he was actually a great giver of charity, but he just didn't want anybody to know. We totally misjudged him. And not only that, we didn't even bury him." So the rabbi called together the community, says, "This Monday, when we read the Torah, we have to call a fast day, and we have to ask for penitence for what we did to our holy friend Joseph the miser, and maybe we'll be forgiven." So the whole community gets together on a fast day, and in the evening, towards the end of the fast, the rabbi opens up the ark with the Torah, and they have a special prayer. And at that point, I guess he was a little bit weak from the fast. He faints. People run over to him and pour water on him. He says, "Rabbi, you okay?" He says, "Yes, when I fainted, it was like a dream. And in my dream, I saw Joseph the miser. I said, 'Joseph, will you forgive us? We did such a terrible thing. We misjudged you. We didn't know what you were doing. And we did such a terrible thing. We didn't bury you. We didn't give you a good funeral. It was a terrible thing.' Joseph said, 'Rabbi, don't worry. Everything's fine, really. I did it the way I wanted to do it. It's not a problem. And about the burial, I had the most wonderful burial that anybody could have. After I was buried, I felt myself ascend, and there was Moses, who was giving the eulogy, and Aaron the priest was giving a blessing, and King David was playing the harp, and Miriam was dancing. It was absolutely wonderful, the most wonderful funeral that anybody could have.'" And that's the story of Joseph the miser. And they say that until today, you can find this grave that says Joseph the Miser in the Krakow cemetery. But unfortunately, today you can't find it because after the Shoah, all the tombstones were destroyed in the Krakow cemetery behind the Ramah synagogue. And the ones that actually are standing today are the ones that they knew where to set up from pictures. So if it was there or not, I don't know, but it's a great story. One of the stories. So this is relating to what you said, Theodora, about the high level of giving charity without anybody knowing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Actually, they say the highest level, of course, is to teach a person a profession. I think it was Confucius who said that, give me a fish and I eat for a day, but teach me how to fish and I eat for the rest of my life. So, yes, and that's the type of thing you can do in Constanza because it's at the sea, right? So, okay, let's continue. So I was talking about tefillah. So tefillah has two parts to it. It's introspection to see if I am worthy of what I'm doing. And secondly, hoping. Now, actually, all this is one aspect of tefillah, of prayer. Because one aspect of prayer in Hebrew is called bakasha, request. But not all prayer is request. There's another side of prayer. Not all part. I'm sorry?
Sliha, bakasha or vakasha?
No, bakasha. Like we say in Hebrew, bevakasha, please. So bakasha means request. Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. So request. But aside from request, there's the idea of prayer as what we say in Hebrew, dveikut, which means clinging to God, a connection, looking for a connection. And this aspect of prayer as a connection is no less important than the request. The fact that we request something to God means that we believe in God. The fact that we're looking for connection means that we want God to be involved in our lives. So it's an even stronger notion. Not only do we believe God's around and therefore we're asking for something, we want God to be part of our life. So that's the connection. And I mentioned that this is also mentioned in the Talmud in Brachot, in the 5th chapter. The Talmud says on the verse of King Solomon, in the book of Kings 1, chapter 8, there is a prayer that King Solomon said when he built the temple, the first temple. And in that prayer, he said, in this temple, God, you will listen to the rina and the tefillah. Tefillah, of course, normally means prayer, and rina means song or joy. It's also a woman's name in modern times, but rina is like song, joyous song, something like that. You will listen to the song and the prayer. So the Talmud says, what's the difference between the word rina and tefillah? Is it two aspects of prayer? So the Talmud says, rina is referring to tefillah, and tefillah is referring to request. Now that sounds a little bit funny because if A is B and B is C, then A is C. So what do you mean that tefillah, that rina means prayer and tefillah means request? What it means is like this, that there are two aspects to prayer. There is the aspect of requesting something, but there's also the aspect of just praying to God because we want the connection. I always say that this is the difference between how a man and a woman talk on the telephone. When a man talks on the telephone, they need information. Hi, I'm at the supermarket. Should I bring anything? Yeah, we need some tuna fish and hamburger meat. Okay, bye. Wait a sec. Yeah? Did I forget anything? No, but how was your day? Okay, so a man, they get the information. They think that's the end of the telephone call. But women see a telephone as connection. So if I'm just getting information, that means I don't care about the connection, right? So it's just a different way of looking at things. So tefillah is both about connection and about requesting. I think I also told you the story told by Menachem Mendel of Kotsk, who was a famous Hasidic Rebbe in Poland, a student of the seer of Lublin. Menachem Mendel, of course, was an unusual individual. He also spent years in isolation from his Hasidim. So, but one time he said about in the story of Genesis of the Garden of Eden, after Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, so each one is punished. Adam, it says, by the sweat of your brow shall you toil. And when you try to plant, instead of food coming out, it'll be kotzim ubarkanim, which means kotz v'dardar, which is thistles and thorns. So it'll, by the sweat of your brow, you have to plant. It'll be very difficult, right? To Eve, God says, okay, when you give birth, it's going to be very painful. And to the serpent, God says, you're going to move on your belly, and you will eat the dust all the days of your life. So, Menachem Mendel says like this, I understand the punishment to Adam and Eve. I don't understand the punishment to the serpent. Because if the serpent can eat dust, that means he has food wherever he goes. That's okay. Can you imagine having food wherever you are? You don't have to shop. You don't have to do anything. So he says, look, I'm not sure that's the actual meaning, but whatever, it's an interesting question. In generally Hasidic interpretations, the answer is more important than the question. So he says, so what exactly was the punishment to the serpent, to the snake? So he says like this. God says to Adam, Adam, you know, I was in the Garden of Eden. You were in the Garden of Eden. You knew I was there, but you forgot me. And that's why you ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because I told you not to. So obviously you forgot me. So I'm going to make sure you don't forget me. When you try to plant and you try to grow food, it's going to be really difficult. So you're going to pray to me and you're going to say, God, please help me get through this agricultural season because I need to eat. I need a little rain. I need the produce grow. I need some help here. So Adam, you're not going to forget me anymore. Then he says, Eve, you also forgot me. So every time you give birth, you're going to feel so much pain. You'll say, God, just get me through this next 30 minutes. And that's it. I'll do whatever you want. Just get me through it. So you won't forget me anymore. But then God says to the serpent, you know what? You're awful. I don't want to have any connection. You have your food. Don't call me, and I won't call you. No connection. And that is the ultimate punishment. No connection. I'll tell you one other thing. The Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers. We read part of the Ethics of the Fathers. In chapter 3, I don't know if I read this with you. In chapter 3, it starts off, Akavia ben Mahalalel. Did I mention this? I don't remember. Kavia ben Mahalalel. He says, if you ponder, if you meditate on 3 things, you will never come to transgression, to bad deeds. He says, what are the 3 things? He says, know where you came from, a smelly drop. Know where you're going, a place of worms and maggots, which means your burial plot. And know before whom you're going to stand, the Holy One, blessed be He. Know where you came from, a smelly drop. Know where you're going, into the ground. And know before whom you're going to stand, meaning to report to. So there used to be a young rabbi in Bucharest, Rabbi Sorin Rosen. I don't know if anybody remembers him. He moved to Canada, actually to my hometown, Montreal. And so he once gave a very nice interpretation of this Mishnah, which sounds very negative and very depressing. He said, actually, this statement of a Akavia ben Mahalalel is the most optimistic statement that you can have. Because think for a moment. most of us don't do things that are in the newspaper. We're not going to be on the news of station 1 or 2 or 3 in Romania, right? Whatever they're called, antenna 1, antenna 2. We're not going to be in the New York Times. Maybe our parents care about us. Maybe our children care about us. But mostly, what we do is insignificant, right? Akavia ben Mahalalel says, saying no. You should know that there's going to be a day of judgment, and God cares about everything you did in your life. You might think you're not important, but he wants to know about everything you did. Wow. Think about a child. If you can't come to their play, if you can't watch their soccer game, they're not happy. They want somebody to recognize what they're doing. God is going to recognize everything you did in your life. So the idea of the final judgment is not a depressing idea. It's an optimistic idea. It means that God actually cares about everything that we do as individuals. So it depends how you look at it. Okay. So we were talking about tefillah. We were talking about tefillah as connection. So now I'd like to enter something from our source sheet. It says, Barachot, page 30b. You can probably see it. It's a mishna. A mishna, of course, I said, is the first collection of sayings from the oral tradition, which was finished in the year 200 by Rabbi Judah, the president of the Sanhedrin. And the Gemara is the discussions of the Mishnah that took place in Babylonia between the years 200 and 500. So first I want to read to you the Mishnah. One should not stand up to say tefillah, which means prayer, except in a reverent frame of mind. If you're about to pray, then pay attention to what you're doing. You should have a reverent frame of mind, which means understand what you're doing. Don't make a joke out of it. Pay attention. Give it the time needed. And then the Mishnah continues, the pious men of old, which in Hebrew is chasidim rishonim, the pious men of old used to wait an hour before praying in order that they could concentrate their thoughts upon their Father in heaven. In other words, they took an hour before their prayer. Now you have to understand, the morning prayer, let's say, is anywhere between half an hour and 45 minutes. But these guys spent an hour just thinking about what they were going to do. The afternoon prayer is about 15 minutes, and they still spent an hour thinking about what they were about to do. The evening prayer is also 15 minutes, and they would spend an hour thinking about it. But what did they do during that hour? By the way, many people say that this is the first source in Judaism that you have people who are actually practicing meditation before prayer. They were, I don't know if it was transcendental meditation, which is a Buddhist idea, but it was a meditation. It was thinking about the words of the prayer, possibly, about what I'm about to do, and putting myself into a mindset that would be appropriate for what I'm about to do. I don't know if you know, but in Jewish tradition, maybe I mentioned this, at the main prayer that we do, it's called the Amidah, the standing prayer. It's also referred to as the 18 benedictions, even though there are 19. So when we say this prayer, the Amidah, the standing prayer, with the 18 benedictions, we when we're standing, before we may start the prayer, we take 3 steps forwards. And then we say the prayer. And when we finish the 18 benedictions, we take 3 steps backwards. And we bow to each side. Now, this is a little thing which most people don't even pay attention, but everybody knows about it. What is the 3 steps forward and the 3 steps backwards? It's to put us in the mind step, the 3 step forwards, to put it in the mind steps that we're going into a frame of mind that we are not going forward, but going upwards into a different realm. We're in the same realm, but in our mind, we have to think that we're moving up. In Kabbalistic tradition, there are 4 worlds, and we're in the lowest. So the 3 steps, each one means going up another world. Now, we can't go up another world physically, but in our minds we can. And the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, once said, wherever your thoughts are, that's where you are. Look, I'm sitting here in Jerusalem, but I'm talking to you in Bucharest. And we're connecting through our speech and our thoughts. So if I would say that, modern technology has definitely proved the point that human beings can be many places through their thought. And we found techniques to do it. So we can live in a virtual world, which the animals don't even understand. They can watch our computers, but they don't understand how there are little people in the computers. That doesn't make sense to them. Okay, it doesn't make sense to some of us too if we never studied computers, but at least we know that it's possible. So, yes. So to put ourselves into a frame of mind is the first thing that we do before the tefillah, before the prayer. Let me go back to this Mishnah. So they used to spend an hour concentrating and meditating before the prayer. Now the Mishnah continues, even if a king greets him while praying, he should not answer him, meaning the silent Amidah. Because if you're standing before God, you don't talk to other people, or else you're not taking it seriously. Even if a king, even if a snake is wound around his heel, he did not break it off. Okay, that's maybe if it's a grass snake. If it's a viper snake, I wouldn't, I don't know about that. But there's actually, the Talmud here tells a story that there was a famous rabbi named Hanina ben Dosa. And as he was praying, they told him that there was a snake called an arvad, some type of a snake that everybody was afraid of. And so he said, okay, tell me where he is. And this was a very saintly man, this Hanina Mendoza. They say they used to eat once a week. It's like he spent all his time in meditation and study and helping people. So he said, okay, where is the snake? He walked to the hole where the snake was. He waited. The snake came out, bit him, and the snake died. And he said to his students, this is to prove to you that it's not the snake that kills. It's the sins that kill. That's what he said. And then he went back to the academy. That's the story that the Talmud says. I wouldn't try it at home. Let me put it that way. They always say, don't try this at home. But the point of the story is that I guess human beings, sometimes we can, I told you the story of Rabbi Druckman. I was telling some of the people, as Rabbi Druckman, who is my rabbi, but from the age of 15 to 20 here in Israel, when I was studying yeshiva, who was a Holocaust survivor, and which I didn't know who was a Holocaust survivor because he never told any of the students until much, much later in his life. And he said he was saved from death 3 times. The first time is when I think it was in 1942 or 43, and I think it was already 42, that he said that Poland, you had the Russians who came in from the north and the Germans who came in from the south. And the Germans were taking more and more of Poland over. And as they came towards his city, the city of Kuto, so they knew that it wasn't a good thing. So they decided to build, under his uncle's house, they built like a bunker where they dug out a place that they could hide. And they all hid underneath they created a basement where they could hide, which was behind a bookshelf or a closet that the closet would close. So the day that the Nazis entered the town, they all went behind the bookshelf and went into the bunker. And they could hear the Nazis shooting in the streets and hitting people with the back of their guns. And they came into the building and they came into the house. And in the house, they started, banging things and looking for things. And because they banged things, the closet door opened, meaning of the cabinet opened. And when the cabinet opened, even the cover to where they were hiding opened. And his grandmother, I guess, coughed. And they were sure that the Germans heard him because everything opened up and she coughed at the same time. But for some reason, I guess with all the banging, they didn't even notice and they just kept going. He says, that was the first time my life was saved. He says the second time was they hid under their uncle's house because in their house, it was in the Jewish quarter. They didn't want to stay in the Jewish quarter. That was too obvious. When they went back to the Jewish quarter to see what was left, they saw that all the houses were destroyed and everybody was killed. So there he says it was like a double salvation because if they would have stayed there, they would have been killed for sure. And the third time I told Olympia, because she's from Constanza, it was when in 1944, he was maybe 10 years old. And his parents said to him, we have somebody who's escaping. We want you to go with him. This was they called it the host family. And they were able to escape Poland and they went to Romania and they went to Constanza where they were able to get a ticket for boats going to Palestine. Of course, the state of Israel, which became the state of Israel. And there were 3 boats and they had a ticket for boat number 1, which was supposed to go from there to Turkey and from Turkey to Haifa. So they waited for their names to be called. The names weren't called. So finally, they went over to some guy who was calling the names, said, you didn't call our names. He looks on the list. He said, I did call your names. It's here on the list. Said, okay, well, now we're here. Said, I'm sorry, this boat is full. You can go in the second boat, okay? Said, okay, we'll go in the second boat. So he put them in the second boat. Okay, so their boat started going. As their boat started getting towards Turkey, they heard in the distance what turned out to be a Nazi warship that torpedoed the first boat and sank it. But the other 2 boats were able to escape. So you have people like this who are saintly people and they get protection. But the rest of us, we can't take too many chances. You never know. Yeah. What's going to happen? Oh, I'll tell you another story, Rabbi Druckman. Not only that happened, after the Oslo Accords in Israel, 1993, I don't know if you know, there was an intifada after the Oslo Accords. And many, many people were killed in Israel because when the Oslo Accords empowered a lot of people, especially among the Palestinians who thought, okay, we're winning, so let's keep going. And there was a major, major terror for the year and a half after the Oslo Accords. And Rabbi Druckman had a driver because he was not a great driver. He got a driver from the place he was working. And the driver would drive him around. And once a week, he would go to Kiryat Arba, which is a Jewish settlement near Hebron in what's called the West Bank. So they're driving towards Hebron, and all of a sudden they hear gunshots, automatic guns going off. And it turns off their car was being shot at. So he turns to the driver, and the driver is not talking. And he sees that there's blood all over the driver. And he says to him, are you okay? Driver doesn't say anything. The driver was killed. And then he looks at himself and he sees that he has blood coming from his shoulder. And he sees that the car is still moving because, it was a stick shift. It was still moving. I was going towards the edge of the road where it was like a 15-meter drop. So he turns off the ignition and the car stopped with 2 wheels over one side of the drop. And he was able to get out of the car. And then luckily there were people there. They took him to hospital. Said in the hospital, he heard on the news that 28 bullets were shot at his car. 2 of them hit him in the shoulder. 1 of them killed the driver, but then he was saved. So what can I say? Sometimes it doesn't always happen that way in life, but it can't hurt to have a little faith and to do the right thing. There was an interview I saw of Rabbi Druckman. This woman was saying to him, what do you do for fun? He says, what do you mean? Says, well, some people like traveling, some people like going to coffee shops. Says, I like helping people. And that's what I like to do. Says, don't you feel like traveling? I said, if I have to do something, I travel somewhere. Do you ever go to a coffee shop? If I have to meet somebody, then I can meet them in a coffee shop. He didn't understand the question. Like, I thought that was very funny. But the truth is, he exactly was like that. We don't all have to be like that, but it's good to have people like that to inspire us. I would say it's important to have people like that to inspire us. Yeah. Father was like that too, and tonight is his Yortzeit. Yortzeit is a Yiddish word. It means the day of the year that he passed away on the Hebrew calendar 3 years ago. Yeah. Yeah, he was a very special individual. So, yeah, lots of stories you can tell about him. My father, when he passed away, decided to write us all letters, but he wrote the letters 6 years before he passed away. Preparations, because how are you supposed to know? And my father once said to my sister, he said, at this point in my life, I think I know more people up there than I do down here. So he wrote it in our letters. Everybody actually got the same letter. He made it in an envelope to everybody, all the children but in the end, it was all the same letter. And he said, look, I believe in the afterlife, so I'm not going to say goodbye. I'll just say I'm taking a temporary leave of absence. Let's put it that way. Yeah. Okay, let's go back to our... Okay, this is the story. Now the Gemara, the Talmud, is now talking about this. First of all, it's talking about the first part of the Mishnah. What does it mean that you have to say your prayers in a reverent state of mind? And where does the Mishnah take this from? What is the source for this Mishnah? Rabbi Eliezer, who lives in the 2nd century, says, well, the scripture says about Hannah, that's Samuel's mother, right? Samuel's mother in the book of Samuel, in chapter 1. So Hannah was barren. She did not have children. And Elkanah's second wife, Pnina, had like 8 children or 10 children. I can't remember now. And Hannah, says, was very bitter. And she went to the tabernacle, the sanctuary in Shiloh, where it was for 400 years. And she went to pray. And when she went to pray, she was weeping and she was very bitter. And Eli, who was the high priest, didn't hear her saying anything. It seems at that time when people prayed, they used to scream and shout. That's the way they prayed. And Hannah was the first one who prayed silently. By the way, from that, the Talmud says that when we do the standing prayer, we do it silently. We learn that from Hannah, the mother of Samuel, to say it silently. Because it says, only her lips were moving and her voice was not audible. So that's exactly how we do the standing prayer. We move our lips, we say it almost in a whisper, but the other person is not supposed to hear because it's a private prayer. Even though we say it in the plural and on behalf of the community, it's still a private prayer because it's our prayer. And even if everybody might be saying the same thing, it's still our prayer. Because we're doing it. You can always add something, but yeah. So Reb Lezer says, it says about Hannah, she was bitter of soul. So if she was bitter of soul, that means that when you pray, you should be in a reverent state of mind, just like Hannah, who was bitter of soul. Then the Talmud says, how can you learn from this verse? Maybe Hannah was different because she was exceptionally bitter at heart. Maybe the average person is not so bitter when they're entering their prayer. So Rabbi Josie, the son of Hanina, says, I can learn it from a different verse from King David in the Psalms. It says, for me, in the abundance of loving kindness, I will enter your house. I will bow down towards your holy temple in fear. So King David says he bows in fear. So from this, we can learn that you're supposed to be reverent when you pray. Again, the Talmud says, how do we know from this verse? Maybe King David was different because King David was exceptionally involved in prayer. I mean, this was a person who was master of prayer. Maybe not all of us are on that level. And Rabbi Joshua and Ben Levi, who is a 3rd century, the end of the 2nd century, Morah in Palestine says also in the Psalms, Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. Don't read hadrat, which means beauty, but cherdat, trembling. I mean, read it as if it says worship the Lord in trembling. And then again, the Talmud says, what do you mean? Maybe it means hadrat, which means beauty. Why are you saying change the word? Maybe it's to be taken literally. After all, don't we know Rabbi Judah used to dress himself up in a nice suit before he would pray? So Rabbi Nachman ben Yitzchak says, no, we can learn it from this. David says, serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. What does it mean, rejoice with trembling? In the place where there is rejoicing, meaning prayer, there should also be trembling. In general, they're looking for different verses, but in the end, the Gemara is trying to look for a verse which is the most appropriate to the Mishnah's idea that when you pray, you should be in a mindset of reverence. Reverence is not fear of punishment. Reverence is, like we say, awe-inspiring. To know that I'm standing before something different. In halacha, they usually say, act as if you're standing before the king. So that'll put you in the right mindset. One moment. Talmud says, wait, I think I jumped over. Okay. The Talmud says about these pious ones, used to spend an hour before praying. The Talmud says he used to spend an hour before prayer and an hour after the prayer. An hour before to meditate on what they're about to say, an hour after to think about what they said, if they did it properly. So then the Talmud says, wait a second. If they spend an hour before their prayer and they pray for an hour and an hour after the prayer, and they do this 3 times a day, they're spending 9 hours a day on prayer and meditation. When do they study Torah? The Talmud says, don't worry about them. Since they are pious, their Torah remains vibrant. And the Jerusalem Talmud actually says, since they are pious, their Torah actually grows through their meditation, which means they understand things from what they previously learned. Okay. Let's look at another one. Also, this is a continuation of this discussion. Let's see how far it goes. Here's the thing which I said to you before. Rabbi Hamnuna said, many important laws can be learned from the verses in the book of Samuel relating to Hannah. It says that Hannah spoke in her heart. From this we learn that one who prays must direct his heart towards the heavens. Only her lips moved. From this we learn that one who prays must frame the words distinctly with their lips. Her voice could not be heard. From this it's forbidden to raise one's voice in the prayer. Therefore, the high priest Eli thought she was drunken. From this, we learn that if a drunken person is forbidden to pray, you have to be in the right state of mind, not intoxicated. By the way, the Kohanim, the priests, were not allowed to do the service of the temple if they were intoxicated. They had to be in a clear frame of mind. Okay, let me go back to this. Okay, the Talmud says, I might say that a person should pray the whole day. It's already been related in the book of Daniel. It says 3 times. We pray three times a day. The Jerusalem Talmud says the reason why we pray 3 times a day is because every time there's a change in nature, a person should react. The sun rises, that's the morning prayer. The sun crosses the middle of the sky, that's the afternoon prayer. It's dark out, that's the evening prayer. Perhaps this practice began only when we went into the exile. It already says, as I did aforetime, which means Daniel did not was not the first to do 3 times, it was done before him. Should a person pray in any direction? So the Talmud says, it says in Daniel, towards Jerusalem. I might think that all the 3 prayers I could do at one shot. And David said, no, evening, morning, and noon is when I pray to you. So we pray evening, morning, and noon. That's called Arvit, Shacharit, and Mincha. And we always face Jerusalem. Should a person's voice be heard in their prayer? Oh, because by Hannah it says, the voice cannot be heard. And that's only the silent standing of prayer. The rest of the time, you can. I might think that a person should ask for their requirements in their prayer. Solomon said, listen to the cry in the prayer. Cry means prayer. This is what I said before. Crying, which means, or it could also mean song, tefillah, and the prayer is private request. So there is both. There's the connection and there's the private request. Let's see what else. Rabbi Lezer said, prayer is more effective than the offerings of the temple. Because after all, doesn't Isaiah say, to what purpose is the multitude of your sacrifices to me? And when you spread forth their hands, do you think I'm going to listen? In other words, Isaiah is saying that if a person commits sins, the offerings are not going to help unless you change your ways. A lot of people think that the Jewish idea of the offerings of the temple are a hocus pocus. They're not. Both Jeremiah and Isaiah say to the people, if you're not going to mend your ways, the offerings are meaningless. They're only after you atone and change your ways, not before. Rabbi Lezer said, on the day on which the temple was destroyed, gates of prayer have been closed. Because after all it says, even when I cry for help, you shut out my prayer. But even though the gates of prayer are closed, gates of weeping are not closed. Meaning, even at difficult times, when we don't have the direct connection through the temple, even if it seems like prayer is closed, when you weep, that's your key, which means you really cared. When you really care about a prayer, then it's efficacious. It does things. The Talmud says in another place, King David says at the end of one of these Psalms, I think it's Psalm 27, he says, hope to God with all your might and hope to God. And so the Talmud says, why twice? It means if a person prayed and was not answered in their prayer, then they should pray again. And then try again. Just keep trying. Maybe you were not sincere enough. And when that moment comes, you're sincere enough, maybe something will happen. So even though the gates of prayer are closed, the gates of weeping is not closed. As it says, hear my prayer, O Lord, and give ear to my cry. Keep not silent to my tears, King David says. Okay. This is another discussion. I'm not going to go into this one now. Yes. Okay, let's read another one. I'm going to change the topic now. That was the topic of prayer. We only have 17, 18 minutes left, so let's read it. Now, that was from the Talmud. Mishnah and the Talmud. This is from a Midrash. As I told you, the Midrash, the names of the Midrash are the same people in the Mishnah, but these particular Midrashim are non-halachic. They're non-legal. They don't deal with issues of Jewish law. They deal with discussions and commentaries on the Bible. Specifically the Genesis Rabbah, Midrash Genesis Rabbah. Okay, let's read the first one. The Lord said, it's not good that man should be alone. I will make a helper for him. Right? If you remember about in Genesis chapter 2 about the creation of Eve. So what does it mean it's not good for man to be alone? We learned. There were 10 utterances in which the world was created. And these are them. First one, at the beginning, God created. That's the first one. And then every other one, it says, and God said. Those are the utterances. And God said, let there be light. And God said, let there be a firmament. And God said, let the waters be gathered. And God said, let the earth put forth grass. And God said, let there be lights in the heavens. And God said, let the waters swarm with fish. And God said, let the earth bring forth animals. And then God said, let us make man in his image. Nachum ben Joseph said, the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. It's included. The last one is, it's not good for man to be alone. So in other words, he makes that as a special command. What does it mean that it's not good? It was taught, he who has no wife has no joy, has no help, there's no blessing, there's no atonement. By the way, this is, you can see, a very Jewish idea that marriage is an act of atonement. Among the Hasidim, by the way, they actually wear a white robe when they get married, which we also wear on the day of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. So it says a person who has no wife is without good. What does it mean without good? Because it says in the Bible, it's not good that a man should be alone. So they're without good. Without help, because it says, I will make a helper for him. So he doesn't have help. Without joy, because it says in Deuteronomy, you shall rejoice, you and your household is your wife. Without blessing, because it says in Ezekiel, to cause a blessing to rest in your house. The assumption is house always means your wife. Without atonement, because it says about Aaron the priest, he shall make atonement for himself and for his house, which is understood as his wife. Rabbi Simeon said in the name of Rabbi Joshua, Levi, also 2nd century, without peace too, because it says in Samuel 1, and peace be upon your house. Your house means your wife. Rabbi Joshua of Sichnin said in the name of Rabbi Levi, we just mentioned before, even without life. As it says in Ecclesiastes, enjoy life with a wife whom you love. If you don't have a wife, you don't have life. Rabbi Taliva ben Gamdi said, also incomplete, because it says in chapter 5 of Genesis, and he blessed them and called their name Adam. Meaning Adam and Eve together referred to as Adam. By the way, in Hebrew, you have the word Adam, which is true in the biblical story. Adam refers to Adam and Chava as Eve. But later on the Torah, Adam means mankind. B'nei ha'adam, the children of man, mean all of mankind. And later on, he was just Adam, a person. And then to differentiate, it becomes Ish and Isha. Ish is a man and Isha is a woman. And in Hebrew also, Ish and Isha are almost the same letters. They both have the Aleph Shin. Ish and Isha have an Aleph Shin, but each one has one different letter. Ish has a Yud, and the Isha has a Hey. The Talmud says, why a Yud and a Hey? Because that's God's name. Yah is one of God's names. It's half of the Tetragrammaton, and sometimes in the Psalms also the term Yah is God, which means if a man and a woman actually get along, then God is within that partnership. But if God is not in the partnership, then all that you have left is the Aleph Shin, which means fire. so that's what can happen. It's either fire or God is in the partnership. The Talmud says that in Kiddushin. It's interesting also that in Hebrew, Ish and Isha sound very similar. And in English, man and woman also sound very similar. I'm wondering if maybe the English, I don't know how it works. I don't know if it works that way in Romanian, But in English, it's like very interesting how somehow these words are related to each other. I'm thinking in French too, also, you don't really have it. You have homme and femme, well, it's sort of homme, femme, the MM at the A, right? It's the difference between the F and the H. Femme, homme, well, FE and HO.
But you have mankind from man.
Mankind, yeah. But when you write man with a capital M, it's also mankind. And in Hebrew, when you say Adam, it could be man or woman theoretically. In modern Hebrew, they don't always say that way, but officially, Adam is either man or woman. One sec. I just have to say, I'll call you back in about 10 minutes. I'm in a class, okay? No problem. No problem. Okay, let's see what else they have here. Okay.
A short question. You know for sure, but I don't know where I read this. A woman is a way of atonement for a man.
Yes.
And
Marrying a
children.
woman. Yeah, marrying a woman is atonement for men.
Please again.
For a man to marry a woman is atonement, which is two things.
Okay, let's put it differently. A man
We
can.
just read that right here, by the way. We just read that in this midrash.
Yes, I know, but just for to clear some things up. So a man can find an atonement through a woman, because a woman brings something religious or a completion to a man.
Marriage is called kiddushin, which means sanctity. And the idea is that when you are sharing your life with somebody and you're taking care of somebody and they're taking care of you, both of you are learning to be giving people.
Good.
That's an
So
act of
here-
atonement just by itself.
Okay.
By leaving my egocentric world and bringing somebody else into it.
And the second thing was that children were a way of atonement for a woman.
That I don't know.
Is there any way?
I'll tell you why I don't know, because also, I mean, having children, most people can have children. Sometimes there are people who cannot. So it doesn't mean that a person who doesn't have a child doesn't have atonement. I am not familiar with a source that says that children are atonement. But it does say that, for instance, there's a mitzvah to give charity. And there's even those who say you should give 10% of your earnings. Of course, it depends, because nowadays they take off so many taxes from the state. You have to be very careful. The Mishnah says, if you want to give charity, don't give more than 20% of what you own, because you don't want to be a charity case yourself. So you have to be very careful, But so the Talmud says, Jewish law actually says, that when a person supports their adult children, a woman over the age of 12 and a boy over the age of 13, they're actually doing an act of charity, because officially these are adult children. So you're actually doing charity by bringing them up. So, yeah. It doesn't mean you're not supposed to keep them in the house, but you are doing an act of charity. So in that sense, yes. Yeah. Just wanted to mention that.
I want,
But
beg
I
your
always say,
pardon?
yeah, sure, Olivia.
I just wanted to mention something that I know and that I find very interesting, because we talked about Adam. Dam means blood. Adam means man.
Yes.
And Adama means earth.
Right.
And it is, with putting only one letter, we have the whole life.
That's true. So Adam comes from the ground, and that's why he's from Adama. Yes. And also Adam has an aleph because dam is the blood, which represents the body, and the aleph represents the soul, because the aleph is the only letter in the Hebrew language which has no pronunciation by itself. There's no way to pronounce it. It's only pronounced according to the vowels, which you add to it, the dots. So it's something almost which doesn't exist in this world. The aleph.
This is very interesting.
Yeah.
I wanted to.
Yeah, by the way, if you take the word aleph in Hebrew, it's spelled aleph lamed pei. If you turn it backwards, it's pei lamed aleph, which means a wonder.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so aleph becomes wonder. Aleph, by the way, in Hebrew means two things. It means, in Aramaic, it means to teach, like the Hebrew word olpan, which is a place you study Hebrew in Israel, olpan. So aleph means to teach. Aleph also means an ox.
And what?
Ox. Ox. It's a very strong animal. Tor, we say in Hebrew. I don't-
Ox Taur.
Yeah. Or like
Ah.
tor. Yeah. Yes. So why is it the ox? I'll show you. When you write an aleph, you write it like this, right? Or you write it like this. A little bit hard to write on this whiteboard, but I'll try, right? In Old Hebrew, the aleph was written like this. Okay? If you take the aleph in Old Hebrew and turn it over, sorry, so you can see the ox.
Oh, okay.
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 Okay, so the aleph was the ox, just like the bait was the bayit, the house, and the gimel, gamal was the camel because he has a hump. The gimel, the big hump. In Old Hebrew, it was mostly the hump. That, yeah. And Daled is both a delet, a door on a hinge. It's also a poor person who stretches out his hand. Whatever. Yeah. Oops. There's a lot to say about the letters of the Hebrew language. Are then a different class. Okay, our time is sort of running out. Maybe we'll hold it this. So we can meet again then next week. I think next week I think the discussion of the Midrashim are interesting, or at least I find it interesting, is the discussion of Cain and Abel here, discussion about Abraham. Let's see what else. So I'm not going to go into it. Maybe we can actually have, and one piece from the Zohar, which also will be interesting. Okay, in the meantime, thank you very much, everybody, for joining. And we had quite a few today. We have 19 people here. So
Thank you very
good.
much.